December 3rd, 1943. Monte Cassino foothills, Italy. The wind carved across the jagged slopes like a sharpened blade, carrying the cold and a low, uneasy hum through the German trenches. Snow, thin but biting, coated the uneven ground, freezing boots and frostbitten fingers alike. Soldiers huddled together, rifles clutched in numb hands, eyes straining toward the shadows where enemy movements might emerge. Rumors had already started to ripple through the ranks. Strange tales of men who appeared out of nowhere, disappeared without a sound, and left devastation in their wake. The whispers had a name: Gurkhas. Feldwebel Otto Reimann, a veteran of Stalingrad, stared into the darkness, trying to dismiss the stories. He had faced countless foes, Red Army infantry, British commandos, but something about these tales gnawed at him. The patrol that had vanished 2 nights ago had left only torn clothes and a single boot, an eerie signature that no human enemy he knew would leave behind. Kesselring's orders were clear: hold the Gustav Line at all costs, yet every man in the trenches sensed the creeping dread, a fear that gnawed at the edges of discipline and morale. Captain Arjun Rana moved silently along the ridges above, surveying the line through the thin fog. His eyes, sharp as the kukri at his hip, noted the frozen streams and rocky outcrops that would define the coming fight. He was a master of mountain warfare, carrying a legacy older than any uniform could symbolize. His men, small in number but unmatched in stealth, were shadows, swift, lethal, unrelenting. The first encounter had not yet occurred, but the psychological warfare had begun. German sentries reported noises that could not be explained, shadows that vanished when approached, and patrols that failed to return. Reimann whispered his doubts to no one, afraid they would call him paranoid. Across the ridge, Rana prepared a reconnaissance sweep, keenly aware of the eyes and ears in the German ranks, knowing that fear itself could become a weapon. Every footstep, every snapped twig, every distant echo was amplified in the soldiers' minds. The High Command, Montgomery coordinating from the rear, pressured Alexander to test the line, while the Germans strained under Hitler's insistence that the Gustav Line remain impenetrable. Tension was a living thing, twisting in the trenches, feeding off whispered rumors of the ghost soldiers. Then came the first evidence. A German patrol sent to scout the ridge failed to return. The only signs left were tracks in the snow, too small for typical infantry, too precise for any machine gun attack, and a set of strange cuts on a tree, carved cleanly and deliberately. The men spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting, imagining figures moving through the night like wraiths. A sudden flurry of movement across the opposite ridge froze Reimann in place. He squinted, catching a glimpse of a figure, smaller than a regular soldier, yet faster, fluid, and terrifyingly deliberate. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a ripple of fear and the certainty that something had changed. The whispers were no longer rumors. They were a warning. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe. This story only gets darker from here. The mountains above Monte Cassino were silent now, but the silence carried a weight that pressed on every German soldier. Snow crunched under boots, but at times it sounded like footsteps were coming from nowhere. Patrols that had been sent out returned shaken, some with frostbite, others with faces pale from fear, mumbling about shadows and strange shapes moving faster than any human should. Captain Arjun Rana led his men along narrow ridges, moving like phantoms. Each step was deliberate, each pause calculated. They weren't just soldiers, they were shadows in the night, carrying centuries of mountain warfare in their bones. German soldiers couldn't see them until it was too late. And when they did, it was often from a distance too fleeting to react. Feldwebel Otto Reimann had faced death before, in Stalingrad and Sicily, but this was different. The fear wasn't just of dying, it was the confusion, the impossibility of understanding what they were up against. One night, he watched from a frozen trench as a patrol disappeared over a ridge. Minutes later, screams echoed, then silence. By morning, the bodies were found, some with strange cuts, some with nothing at all. The men refused to go out at night. Rana's platoon moved through the fog like ghosts, striking where the German lines were weakest. They bypassed machine gun nests and cut communication lines before anyone even realized they had been there. Every German officer questioned how such small numbers could inflict so much chaos. Were they soldiers, or something else entirely? Meanwhile, the German high command was growing anxious. Kesselring reviewed reports with increasing tension, noting patrols missing and unusual attack patterns. On the Allied side, Montgomery and Alexander monitored the progress of their Gurkha units, recognizing the psychological effect they were having. These were not just tactical victories. They were shaking the enemy's confidence, slowly eroding the Gustav Line's morale before a single major battle. Night after night, the Germans tried to adapt, setting traps and reinforcing their posts. But the Gurkhas seemed to anticipate every move, appearing where least expected. Otto Reimann began writing in his journal, a rare habit for a soldier in combat, trying to make sense of it all. He described the fear in simple words. They come like shadows. You hear nothing. You see nothing. Then they are there, and it is too late. By the end of the second week, the Germans whispered a new name, mountain ghosts. And every time a patrol failed to return, their fear grew, proving that in this campaign, the mind could be as dangerous as any weapon. The tension in the Gustav Line trenches wasn't just in the mountains. It stretched all the way back to the command posts. Reports of missing patrols, strange attacks, and impossible movements reached the German high command, and for the first time, Kesselring's confidence wavered. Hitler's orders were simple: hold the line at all costs. But what if the line couldn't be held against something you couldn't even predict? Far to the north, in Allied command tents, Montgomery and Alexander studied maps and reports with a growing sense of satisfaction. The Gurkhas were proving more effective than anyone had dared hope. Every movement was calculated, precise, and devastating to German morale. Radio reports described German soldiers refusing to patrol, men whispering about shadows that moved faster than bullets, cutting down anyone who ventured into the wrong valley. Captain Arjun Rana received new orders. His platoon would move at night, scaling icy cliffs to disrupt German communications and create openings for the larger Allied assault. The stakes were high. One misstep could leave them stranded, trapped in the enemy's territory, or worse. But Rana knew his men were ready. Fear was not something they carried, it was something they used. Back in the trenches, Feldwebel Otto Reimann and his men huddled over maps and reports, trying to make sense of the attacks. Every tactic they tried seemed to fail. They reinforced positions, doubled patrols, and set traps, but the Gurkhas seemed to anticipate every move. Otto's mind raced. How could such small units move with such precision in terrain so familiar to him? The sense of dread grew with every missing patrol, every silent night, every unexplained cut in the trees. The night before the next operation, German officers debated strategy. Should they reinforce the ridge? Pull back and consolidate? Kesselring demanded action, but uncertainty hung in the room like smoke. Even experienced officers questioned what they were dealing with. Then came intelligence reports from Italian partisans. The Gurkhas were planning a high-altitude night assault on a key German observation post. The report made Otto freeze. The mountain ghosts weren't just raiding patrols. They were striking deep into the heart of German positions, under cover of darkness, where no one thought it possible. The tension between command and reality grew. On both sides, leaders weighed the risks, knowing that the coming night could change the battle for the Gustav Line. And in the shadows above the cliffs, Rana and his men prepared, ready to move silently, letting fear itself do part of the work. The morning fog clung to the jagged slopes of the Monte Cassino foothills, muffling the sounds of movement. German soldiers patrolled cautiously along the narrow ravines, their rifles ready, hearts heavy with tension. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant noise amplified in the silence. They had heard the rumors for weeks, about small, shadowy figures moving faster than the eye could follow. And now, Captain Arjun Rana's platoon was about to prove the whispers were real. The first attack came suddenly. A German outpost guarding a small ravine reported nothing unusual, then screams shattered the quiet. Men fired blindly into the fog, bullets tearing through trees and snow. By the time they realized what had happened, 2 guards were down, and the remaining soldiers were scrambling to regroup. The attackers were gone. No one had seen them, yet the damage was done. Rana's platoon moved with precision. Every step was planned, every path rehearsed in their minds. They knew the terrain better than the Germans, slipping through narrow passes that seemed impossible to traverse under the cover of darkness. The Gurkhas struck silently, taking out sentries and cutting communications before melting back into the fog. Feldwebel Otto Reimann could only watch from a distance, disbelief etched into his face. He had been in firefights across Europe, but he had never faced soldiers who seemed to vanish at will. It was as if the mountains themselves had conspired against him. Panic began to spread among the German troops. Men refused to move into positions that had been safe just hours earlier. Meanwhile, Alexander and Montgomery monitored the reports from Allied observation posts. The effectiveness of the Gurkhas was staggering, not just in terms of casualties inflicted, but in the psychological toll on the enemy. Every patrol gone missing, every outpost abandoned, eroded the German confidence in ways conventional warfare could never achieve. Then came the twist. A small German counterattack stumbled into a trap. Rana's men had anticipated it, channeling the enemy into a narrow section of the ravine. The Germans found themselves surrounded, firing at shadows, unable to hit anything solid. By the time they retreated, more than half their number were incapacitated, and the surviving officers were shaken to their core. In the aftermath, Otto Reimann scribbled in his notebook, the word simple but telling, "We are not fighting men. We are fighting ghosts." The ravine had become a proving ground for the Gurkhas, and the psychological edge they carried was just beginning to tip the balance on the Gustav Line. The German aid station smelled of blood and cold metal. Inside, soldiers sat quietly, bandaging wounds and whispering in low tones. Some were pale, others shaking. The air was heavy with fear, and every man seemed haunted by what they had seen, or thought they had seen, on the ridges and in the ravines above Monte Cassino. Feldwebel Otto Reimann moved among the injured, listening. They were reluctant to speak, afraid that saying the wrong thing would mark them as cowards. But the stories came out in fragments, each one more disturbing than the last. One soldier described a figure moving across the snow, so fast that bullets couldn't catch it. Another whispered of a shadow cutting down an entire patrol before anyone could fire back. Reimann tried to reconcile these accounts with logic, but it was impossible. The Gurkhas weren't just soldiers. They were a force that operated outside the rules he understood. Their attacks were small but precise, leaving no trace, and hitting where it hurt most. Every story confirmed what he had feared. The rumors were real, and the enemy was unlike anything he had faced before. Meanwhile, Captain Arjun Rana and his platoon rested briefly, cleaning their weapons and checking the terrain for the next move. They had already inflicted heavy damage and disrupted German positions, but the work wasn't done. Rana understood the importance of psychology in war. Each attack was carefully calculated to terrify and confuse the enemy. Back in the aid station, the soldiers continued to share their experiences. One man confessed that he hadn't been able to sleep for days, haunted by the memory of small, silent figures appearing from the mist, striking, and vanishing as if they were spirits of the mountains. Another revealed that the fear was spreading among the officers, creating hesitation and mistakes in judgment. Otto wrote it all down. His journal, a rare outlet in a war where emotion was often suppressed, became a testament to what the Germans had encountered. "They are not bound by fear like we are," he scribbled. "They move through the darkness, through snow and fog, untouched by the rules of war. We are unprepared for this." By the time night fell again, the Gustav Line was alive with tension. German soldiers avoided certain paths, patrols were halved, and commanders debated the impossible. The Gurkhas had not only inflicted physical damage, they had shattered confidence. And in war, confidence could be just as deadly to an enemy as any bullet or blade. Back in Rome, the air in the command tents was thick with tension. Reports from the Gustav Line arrived in waves: missing patrols, destroyed outposts, and terrified soldiers. Kesselring's brow was furrowed as he reviewed each dispatch, trying to understand how a handful of Gurkhas could cause such chaos. Orders from Hitler were clear: hold the line no matter what, but the reality on the ground was proving dangerously different. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, Alexander and Montgomery monitored the reports with quiet satisfaction. The Gurkhas were not only executing their missions flawlessly but also destabilizing German morale. Every outpost abandoned, every patrol lost, was a step closer to breaking the Gustav Line without a full-scale assault. They knew the psychological effect was just as important as the tactical victories. Captain Arjun Rana's platoon moved through the mountains with their usual precision. Night after night, they struck at weak points, disrupted communication lines, and slipped away before the Germans could respond. Rana understood the delicate balance of fear and strategy. Each action was designed not just to inflict casualties but to make the enemy hesitate, second-guess, and doubt themselves. Feldwebel Otto Reimann faced growing pressure from his superiors. Patrols that once seemed routine were now death traps. Soldiers whispered about shadows in the fog, silent figures moving with unnatural speed, cutting through lines before anyone could react. Reimann wrote down their accounts, trying to keep his mind grounded in reality, but doubt crept in. He had faced many enemies, but nothing had ever unsettled him like this. The Germans attempted countermeasures: reinforced posts, doubled patrols, and traps laid along the ridges. Yet the Gurkhas anticipated their every move. It was as if they could read the terrain and the minds of their enemies. Every failed counterattack only heightened the tension within the German ranks. Reports of the Gurkhas' effectiveness reached even Churchill, who followed the Italian campaign closely. He recognized their value not only in combat but as a psychological weapon. The Allies were learning a harsh lesson: fear could be as decisive as firepower. By the end of the week, both sides were reacting to each other in real time. High command strategies clashed with mountain realities. Kesselring was forced to reconsider his defenses, Alexander and Montgomery adjusted their plans, and Rana prepared his next night raid. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test courage, skill, and the limits of fear itself. Darkness fell over the Monte Cassino ridges, thick and heavy like a blanket pressing down on the soldiers below. The fog rolled in from the valleys, swallowing every sound, every movement. German troops huddled in trenches and behind rocks, rifles ready, senses straining. Every snap of a twig, every crunch of snow underfoot, set nerves on edge. They had heard the stories, lived the fear, but nothing could truly prepare them for what was coming. Captain Arjun Rana's platoon moved silently along the ridge, shadows within shadows. The Gurkhas were experts in night operations, their every step calculated, their every move deliberate. They carried their legendary kukris, blades gleaming faintly in the moonlight, but their greatest weapon was fear itself. The Germans couldn't see them until it was too late, and often, even then, it was only a fleeting glimpse. Feldwebel Otto Reimann and his men were on edge. Patrols had gone missing all week, and now rumors of an imminent night assault reached their ears. He knew this would not be a regular skirmish. Every man held his breath as the silence stretched. Then came the first screams, sudden and piercing, slicing through the fog. German soldiers fired blindly into darkness, but the Gurkhas were already moving elsewhere, striking with deadly precision, disappearing like ghosts. The night dragged on with terrifying intensity. Small German units were ambushed, communications cut, and posts overrun in minutes. Otto found himself trapped on a narrow ledge, facing a figure moving faster than he could track. The Gurkha captain was there, appearing from nowhere, calm, deliberate, and utterly deadly. Time seemed to slow as Otto realized the truth. He was not just facing skilled soldiers, he was facing warriors who had mastered fear itself. Elsewhere, Rana's men coordinated silently, guiding each attack with careful strategy. Even the experienced German officers were caught off guard, unsure where the next strike would come from. The psychological effect was devastating. Men froze, misfired, and abandoned positions without orders. By dawn, the ridge was silent again. German casualties were heavy, but the mental toll was heavier. Otto Reimann scribbled in his journal, "Tonight, we fought men, but also the shadows of the mountains. We survived, but something in us has changed." The Night of Blades would become a story whispered among the survivors for weeks, a legend of skill, fear, and psychological warfare. And for Captain Arjun Rana, it was another step toward breaking the Gustav Line, one silent, deadly strike at a time. The ridge above Monte Cassino was quiet now. The morning sun burned away the fog, revealing the scars of the past nights, upturned earth, spent shell casings, and the frozen remnants of battle. The German soldiers who survived the Night of Blades moved cautiously, their eyes still scanning for threats that might no longer exist. But the fear they carried with them was very real, and it lingered like a shadow over every step. Feldwebel Otto Reimann sat in a makeshift aid station, surrounded by his men. They were exhausted, frostbitten, and shaken. Conversations were subdued, each soldier hesitant to speak aloud the horrors they had witnessed. Yet in whispers, the truth emerged. The Gurkhas had moved through the mountains like shadows, striking suddenly, vanishing just as quickly, and leaving an indelible mark on their morale. One soldier described seeing a Gurkha emerge from the mist, kukri in hand, moving silently among them, striking with deadly precision before disappearing as if swallowed by the mountain itself. Another admitted that he had dropped his rifle and run, something he would never have done in earlier campaigns. Each story reinforced the same idea: these were not ordinary soldiers. They were experts of terrain, masters of stealth, and psychological warfare incarnate. Captain Arjun Rana and his platoon surveyed the aftermath. They moved like shadows themselves, ensuring no German positions remained secure, cutting communication lines, and leaving subtle marks that would keep fear alive. For Rana, the mission was clear: every strike mattered, not only physically but mentally. The goal was to make the enemy question every movement, every decision, every night spent on the Gustav Line. High command on both sides took note of the results. Kesselring's reports were grim. Units refused to patrol, morale was crumbling, and the once proud Gustav Line showed signs of fracture. Alexander and Montgomery documented the success of the Gurkhas, understanding that their impact went far beyond the immediate tactical victories. Fear had become a weapon, and the Gurkhas wielded it with unmatched skill. Otto Reimann, now writing the last entries in his journal from that campaign, paused and reflected. "We fought soldiers," he wrote, "but also the ghost of courage, discipline, and death itself. In every shadow, we felt eyes upon us. In every movement, we expected the impossible. These men, these Gurkhas, have changed how we see war." The legend spread quickly among the German troops. Even the hardened veterans of Stalingrad and Sicily whispered of the mountain ghosts, recounting stories of encounters that defied belief. The Gustav Line would endure, but its defenders were never the same. A small force had turned fear into strategy, proving that courage, precision, and understanding of the terrain could overcome sheer numbers and firepower. And so, the first meeting between German soldiers and Gurkhas became a story that would echo through history. It was a tale of skill, courage, and terror, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is not a rifle, a tank, or artillery, but the shadow of fear, perfectly executed by disciplined warriors. If you want more WW2 stories like this, filled with hidden moments and untold perspectives, subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of history.